Welcome to the Saturday Cup of Joe podcast. This podcast is dedicated to EAS employees of the U.S. Postal Service and members of the National Association of Postal Supervisors. So, pour yourself a cup of coffee and join us for today's episode. And now, here's your host, Robert Wakefield.
Good morning, Branch 32, and good morning to our EAS friends across the country. Welcome to the Saturday Cup of Joe podcast presented by the Nashville Post Office Credit Union. I'm your host, Robert Wakefield, president of NAPS Branch 32. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's great to have you all here. So let's go ahead and let's pour that first cup. If you are not already a member of the Nashville Post Office Credit Union, why not? Now is the perfect time to join. For every new account opened, you will be entered into a drawing for cash prizes and gift cards. Stop by the Nashville Post Office Credit Union today to get your new account opened. The drawing will be held on December 6th. The Nashville Post Office Credit Union. Visit npocu.org. And for our first cup today, I want to start a new series called Taking Care of Yourself. When did it become peak season? Back when I was working, it was always called, Christmas. We always just called it the Christmas season. It was just the time where everything was coming through, cards, letters, packages, the whole thing. And so, they've changed that to peak, and that seems to be the time where we don't take care of ourselves the most. Mentally, physically, spiritually, it just seems to be for EAS employees, this is a time where we forget to take care of ourselves. The demands of the jobs nowadays for EAS employees is as strong as it ever has been. I can't not remember a time where peak season is more stressful, more demanding, the checklists continue to grow, and yet the time to get it all done seems to shrink. And one of the things we seem to forget, especially during this time of year, is to take care of ourselves. So let me just start out by saying this. How many times have I heard this from EAS employees, especially our members? Had somebody say, well, we're so busy and we're so short-staffed that I don't even get to take my lunch. Or how about this one right here? The only way I can get close to getting my work done is if I don't take lunch and I work straight through it. I was talking to a brand new supervisor not too long ago who told me that all of these problems that they were going through their offices and the things that were happening, and I always have to work through my lunch. And I stopped her right there and I said, whoa, you're working through your lunch? She said, yeah, I have no time to take lunch. What do you mean you don't have time to take lunch? Let me be clear about something. You have time to take your lunch. And we're going to talk about that. Taking your lunch is part of taking care of yourself. Now, I've got to be honest with you. I once had this problem. I remember when I was first getting into the supervisory part of it and later became a postmaster, I would often work through my lunch. I would bring my sandwich, have my bag of chips, have me a drink of some kind right there, and I would sit at my computer and either answer emails or do a report, or if I was on the window, I would just eat in between customers. Whatever it was, I would work through my lunch. The problem was that when I was working through my lunch, a clerk would come and ask me a question, or a clerk would come up and say, oh, someone wants to see you at the window, or the phone would ring, or a carrier would call me. I never, ever got to take my lunch. So I decided to do the bold thing, and instead of eating lunch in my office, I would go to the break room. That's right. I thought if I went to the break room that all of my problems would be solved. Well, in my case, it wasn't. The clerk still came back there to ask me questions. I was still called to the window. I was still called to the phone. I still would get on a telecon. It did not solve my problem. So the only way that I could solve my problem of taking my lunch was to get out of the office. Whether I sat in my car or whether I drove to a nearby park or if I drove to an adjacent parking lot, I had to get away from the office. It's just a smart thing to do. It's a great way to take care of yourself. Well, they say, well, wait a minute, I don't have time to take lunch. How did you find time to take lunch? Well, I made time to take my lunch because the ELM authorizes everyone to get a lunch break. It's in ELM 432.33, and the headline is mealtime. Okay? Let's read what it says. Except in emergency situations or where service conditions preclude compliance, no employee may be required to work more than 6 continuous hours without a meal or a rest period of at least a half an hour. So it's right there in the ELM. Your manager says you don't have time to take lunch. Oh, yes, you do. It's your meal time. It is a time for rest. It's either a half hour or an hour, no more than 2 hours. Breaks do not, your lunch break cannot be longer than 2 hours. So, because it says it's 8 within 10 on the very next section of this ELM requirement. So let's consider all this about taking your meal time and why it's important to take it. Well, the first thing that I have to point out is you're not getting paid. That's right. You're doing work and you're not getting paid for it. Many of you, if not most of you, are on automatic clock rings. And it automatically deducts time away, usually an hour, and you're not getting paid for that. So why are you in the office continuing to work? Because remember, as Tim Bad Mama Jamma Ford once said, we work for money. We don't work for the Postal Service. Our time is worth being paid for. I guarantee you a craft employee is not going to work for free, and neither should you. So we get paid. We get time off. We don't get paid to work through our lunch period. And here's the second problem that happens with this thing. If you work through your lunch, it gives the Postal Service the wrong idea that you can complete all of these tasks within 8 hours. It looks like you're doing a ton of work and you're doing it in 8 hours when that's not true. You're doing it in 9 hours. There's a cost of doing business. And one of those costs is that people have to be taken care of. And working off the clock is another subject we'll talk about later on. But working through your lunch is not the right thing to do because it gives the wrong impression to the Postal Service on the time allotted to get these tasks done. So the first thing, you're not getting paid for it. The second part is the Postal Service thinks you're getting all this work done within an 8-hour time frame. And thirdly, and most importantly, you need it. You need to get away from the reports. You need to get away from the emails. You need to get away from the computer. You need to get away from the phone calls. You need to get away from the clerks, the mail handlers, your other bosses that are on the workroom floor. You need that time to reset every day. I think that is the most critical part of the lunch period, is the reset. With everything that you're going through right now, it's so important to have a moment to reset mentally, physically, get some nourishment, taking some time away from all of the monotony that you're going through. It is so important that you take your lunchtime because it gives you a chance to exhale. I've heard members that are members of Branch 32 that work at the plant say, well, they just called me on the radio. Turn the radio off. Turn it off during your mealtime. It'll wait. If a machine goes down, it'll be down 30 minutes later. It's okay. That's my suggestion. And customer service supervisors say, well, there's no one to watch the floor for me if I take a lunch break. That's not your problem. That's your boss's problem to cover that. It's just important that you get that time away. The ELM authorizes you to take a break after 6 hours, and if you don't take it, that is on you. So what is my suggestion? How can you take care of yourself and make sure you get your lunch? How about this? Let's put it on your checklist. Put your lunch break on your checklist and take your lunch every day, because you'll be a better person by doing so, and it'll help you take care of yourself. I don't know about you, but I'm ready for that second cup. Are you stressed over holiday expenses and don't know what to do? Let the Nashville Post Office Credit Union help. We are offering a Christmas loan up to $1,200 at the low rate of 12% for 12 months. Not to mention no payments for 60 days. This offer is valid until January 31st. So stop by our office or visit npocu.org for more information. For our second cup today is what I meant to say. I wanted to just remind all of the members of Branch 32 and all NAPS members across the country that the open season for the Postal Service health benefit plans is now open. Be sure you go in there if you want to change your health plans. Be sure to go in there and do that before December the 9th. And my suggestion is don't put it off. Go ahead and get that done. If you're going to make changes to your health insurance, go ahead and get those done right now. So for the second cup, I wanted to tell you the story of what happened to me at the Postal Convention in Foxwood Resorts this past August. They have vendors there, and all the vendors give away stuff. So everybody's signing up to be a part of these giveaways. So I was signing up at the Atlantic City booth. They were one of the cities that was hoping to host the convention in the future. And so as I was filling out my little name and phone number and all that good stuff, I dropped it in. And right after I dropped it in, the lady behind the desk said, listen, we're about to have this drawing. Would you mind doing the drawing for us? And I said, no, I don't mind doing that at all. And right when she said, do you mind doing the drawing? A lady was on one of those scooters and went by and says, hey, are you fixing to draw out the winner? And I said, yes, ma'am, I am. And she said, well, draw out, and I can't remember her name. She was from Virginia. I'm just going to say her name was Helen Smith. She said, well, draw out Helen Smith. And so I reached into this big box and went all the way to the bottom, pulled this name out, and I said, Helen Smith, here is your name. I have just drawn it out. And without looking at it, I handed it over to the lady behind the desk. The color went out of her face. She said, what did you say your name was? She said, well, I'm Helen Smith. And she said, where do you live? And she said, well, I live in, I'm going to make up something, Alexandria, Virginia. She said, I cannot believe it, but he just drew out your name. And sure enough, I had drawn out this lady's name at random who just happened to be going by on her scooter going back into the convention when I drew her name out. She won 2-night stay at an Atlantic City hotel and $250 of casino gameplay, and all because she just happened to drive by when I drew her name out. It was the craziest thing I have ever seen. It was so funny. And, I had my picture made with her. I was her favorite person that day. She was all hugged up to me, great going, Robert. Way to go. Appreciate you drawing out my name. I am supposed to get a coffee mug, which I have yet to receive from the Atlantic City people. But if you're listening to this podcast, I love coffee. And that's the reason why we call this Saturday Cup of Joe. So thank you for listening to today's Saturday Cup of Joe podcast presented by the Nashville Post Office Credit Union. Now you know the drill. Sharing this podcast with your EAS friends and NAPS members is what's going to make this thing grow, and you've been doing that. It is growing. The top 5 states of listeners is Tennessee, North Carolina, Illinois, Virginia, and Florida and South Carolina are tied for the 5th spot. So thanks so much for sharing this podcast with all your friends. Get subscribed, stay subscribed, and share this podcast. I'm Robert Wakefield, and remember, every great weekend starts with a great cup of Joe. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for tuning in to the Saturday Cup of Joe podcast. Please note that the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of Robert Wakefield and do not necessarily reflect the views of the National Association of Postal Supervisors. We welcome your questions and comments, so send those to SaturdayCupofJoe@gmail.com.